All right. So today we have Jonas Andrulis. He is the founder and CEO of Aleph Alpha, and its tagline is Next Generation AI Made in Europe. So Jonas, welcome to the Data Exchange podcast.
Hey, great to be here.
So let's start with a high-level overview of what is Aleph Alpha.
Yeah, happy to do so. So I started the company in 19 when I left Apple and went back to Germany and started this company. And the goal really was to build the technology. Like there was in like 2018, 2019, there was kind of some very first hints at generalizable AI, at kind of world models.
Transformers.
Yeah, I mean, not just Transformers. This was also Transformers, but another work that absolutely blew me away was the world model from Schmidhuber's group that was playing Doom. So basically, it was. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Yann LeCun had a presentation at NIPS in 2016 where he showed a cake, the slide of a cake, and he basically said supervised learning is just the icing on the cake. And what my last company did, and what, of course, I like when I was in Apple, we did also a lot of supervised learning. So I saw my fair share of data annotation. And basically, what the next generation of AI for me was an AI that was not limited in scope by human labeling and human annotation. And that was not just Transformers, but of course, Transformers played a big role here.
So, 2019, there must have been the first large language models.
Yeah, actually, one of the very first things we did was train a model that was very similar to GPT-2 and train this on all the speeches by Angela Merkel. So we had an artificial chancellor that could give us, for like any prompt, could give us a speech as that sounded very much as something that Angela Merkel would say.
So that was the origin story of Aleph Alpha. So how did it play out? So what is Aleph Alpha's core offering right now?
So one of the again, like things that we can trace back to the very beginning was the idea that we wanted to make this technology available and accessible, also in environments that are extremely difficult to get right. So we kind of, from the very beginning, we started working with healthcare companies and government customers, right? So the goal was, it was never a B2C focused thing. It was always kind of, we want to go to where there's kind of critical use cases and massive value. But then, of course, we were also like surprised by the speed of change, like with GPT-3 and yeah, the speed of change in like recent weeks is just bonkers. But we developed to a company that is now able to have the best enterprise-ready generative AI offering. And we were also able to contribute some category-defining innovations, like multimodality, for example. This is kind of what we published in 21 and have in production ever since. And just a few weeks ago, we basically solved, quote unquote, hallucinations and explainability.
So that's great, because I'm a big proponent of these custom foundation models, because I think that there are many reasons why organizations, particularly enterprises, will be uncomfortable working with APIs, and not only for privacy, security, and intellectual property reasons, but also control of how fast you can innovate, and also customization. So Jonas, as I look at this space right now, right, so it seems like in this custom foundation models, the two topics that people are super interested in is this notion of fine-tuning or tuning a model, right? And then the other one is retrieval augmented kind of systems, right? But then when you look at both of these things, at the heart of it is your data, right? So data is still at the heart. I mean, it doesn't have to be labeled, but you still have to have data, and you might still need domain experts to teach the model. So talk to us about the centrality of data as you move to this kind of enterprise environments.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything you said. Enterprises need to adapt and integrate and customize, but also need to understand and need to take responsibility. For these critical use cases, responsibility can never lie at an AI. It can always only be at a human, or of course at a legal entity. Of course, this is also possible, but and this requires much more than just an API and then an answer that is mostly right, or in most cases right, with no way to kind of contextualize that with your own data. And of course, with the companies that we're working with in the legal domain, in the health domain, the financial domain, their data and their knowledge is what makes them so valuable. And so that's like, I think, a new level of AI integration that is more difficult, that takes longer. Just like data integration is oftentimes a huge effort. But then this is really an era where enterprises can now build value out of data that they've been collecting for decades, and they were never really able to kind of make any sense of that. And now that's possible. So I think that's a super interesting world. And then, of course, together with this data and customization, we are redefining human-machine collaboration. So we already have several integrations that are where the kind of transformer or the LLM is not just kind of doing chat or copywriting, but is driving business processes, is modeling software, is accessing databases. And of course, this requires heavy customization.
So in many ways, the introduction or the unveiling of ChatGPT in November kind of changed expectations on the end user part, right? So before, maybe you're not, when you do search, you type in something and then you expect a list of answers. Now people's expectations seem to have shifted a little bit in terms of how they interact with the systems. Is this true also, Jonas, in the enterprise?
Well, there's been some news reports on enterprises that got into deep shit because people were kind of posting things to ChatGPT they shouldn't have.
I guess a more direct question is, are your customers saying, we want our own version of ChatGPT for our data?
And that's a super simple kind of C-level pitch, basically just saying, maybe you want to have your own ChatGPT that is based on your own knowledge, and in our case, we're kind of also then adding that even comes with like sources, proof, context, and auditability. So basically all those enterprise features, access control, basically, that's kind of a pitch, a super simple pitch. And then many of our customers doing a lot more than that, but that's basically what everybody wants. Like every enterprise can make good use of their own ChatGPT based on their data, with sources, with proof.
Yeah. And many of these enterprises already have established practices around privacy, security, and governance. So now, of course, it centers around these prompts, right? So you have to kind of have the same kind of philosophy around governance and security and privacy for those prompts. So a quick question for you, Jonas, for our listeners who are not as deep in the weeds as you are. So in recent weeks and months, we're starting to see the release of these, I hate to call them mid-size models because some of them are still 12 billion parameters, right? So mid-size models. And as of now, most of them don't have the license that people can actually use, right? So they're research only. But I expect maybe in the next month we'll have some of these models that are more like Apache or MIT license that people can run with. So let's assume that, fast forward to, you now have 10 or 20 of these to choose from. This might be an impossible question, but if you're a company, you take one of these models, what's the rough cost of taking one of those models and customizing it for your data and your domain?
So
by not just customizing, but doing all the things you need to do to deploy, which includes alignment and things like that. So give us a sense of. We know that. So I think our listeners know that to train models from scratch is in the millions, right? So, but now you're
not actually for those models. So when you really do the math, right, for like a 12 billion parameter model,
it's still 500,000.
Well, not even. You can. So I would say with like if you have like reasonable prices, you don't have like tons of experiments that fail. You basically have everything set. You just push the button.
But a typical company who's still starting out will make a lot of mistakes in the beginning.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
So let's just say it's expensive to train from scratch.
Okay, yeah.
So to take one of these friendly licensed models and do all the things you need, tune, hook it up to a vector database with retrieval augmented things, do some alignment, do some security tests and stuff. Is that going to be beyond the reach of a typical company and only limited to Fortune 500 companies, or you think it's actually not going to be as cost prohibitive?
So I would say nobody's going to do that.
Okay.
Because I mean, that is like somewhat of a similar question. If you would say, let's take some, I don't know, like building like framework like Django, and of course you can use that and build your own HR application or your own dating app. Right? When I look at just our roadmap, as of now, we don't have tons of features, but we do have some that were quite tricky to do. But in like a few months, we'll have so much really difficult to get right enterprise features. And like this is a lot more than just the LLM, right? If it's not just the LLM, it's basically many of our customers, they're not even hooking up to the completion endpoint. So we have like higher level kind of endpoints. You just mentioned that, like a knowledge-based connector that kind of works via synchronous and asynchronous retrieval, a conversational module where you can just add conversational interface to anything from like your database, your business process to your toaster. And so that's where I see this going. It's like when you look at the cloud and the hyperscalers, nobody is really like going bare metal, spawning instances, installing their own Kubernetes. Right? People are just using these virtualized, super powerful services that are easy to use.
But right now people are doing this, but they're interacting with APIs, right? So I mean, you can get a lot. Let's say you're not domain specific, you're just doing general tasks. You can use one of these APIs. So you can imagine one of these things sitting inside an enterprise, exposed to services within the enterprise, trained for the enterprise specific data, right? So why is that not viable?
So I mean, they'll do this, but they'll not kind of build this themselves from open source. When you look at what we are licensing, like what enterprises are getting if they license something from us, is it like a full stack that handles deployment, operations, scaling, monitoring. That way you have like 4 different ways of fine-tuning, where all the things that can go wrong during fine-tuning, they're already taken care of. So it's basic, and so there will be, and it's not going to be just us, but there will be offers for the enterprise that are so good and so capable and so kind of rich in features, like functional and non-functional features, that it just makes no sense for them to hire people and start building from open source models.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So no, I don't think that they will build from open source models, but open source models will have a role. And
sure.
The question is, who can package it in the way you describe,
Mhm.
right? And I believe that, yeah. So I do think that there will be some role for these open source models to serve as the foundation to build upon, just because people will be more comfortable. Just like you know, you might say, I have a database or a data lake house, right? So, but I wanted to have at some level some open source foundation, even if it's just a file format or whatever, right? So that I don't want to be locked into a single vendor, right? So I don't want to be locked into a single kind of style of doing things, right? So there will be um, open source artifacts, but also maybe open standards for how to talk to these things, right? So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
I mean, there's always room for great open source projects. There's room for open office, but many enterprises choose not to use it.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, maybe that's yeah. I don't. Yeah. So I think in the model case, though, yeah, I just said I have a sense, given the amount of interest that these open source, even the preliminary open source artifacts that don't have this friendly license are generating so much interest. People literally want to build, right? So, but they're not going to build on something that's completely beyond the reach, I don't think. I
I
mean,
mean,
that's
the
just
open, the
my.
open the open source community is phenomenal. We've always kind of enjoyed interacting, and what I absolutely am amazed to see is the creativity that has been spawned by these tools. The kind of things engineering around, like people, like the projects that have been created engineering around Stable Diffusion, the kind of the projects that are using language models. So I'm absolutely blown away by that, and I agree with you that many of those hobbyists, or let's say artists, they don't want to use a commercial offer. They want to kind of play around with that and modify it for themselves. But of course, this fundamentally limits the capability you can get. And so it's not what I would
Yeah. I
expect
mean,
enterprises.
there'll
Yeah.
be companies who will build the
Yeah, sure.
enterprise features.
Yeah.
So another thing that I noticed about your company is Europe is front and center in all of your messaging, right? So in fact, as I noted in the tagline, next generation AI made in Europe, and right below that, pioneering sovereign European AI technology to transform human machine interaction. And then much more, to be the leading European company researching and creating next generation strong AI. So talk to us a little bit about this kind of centrality of Europe in your messaging.
Yeah, maybe it's like a little bit too much, because of course I'm European by heart, and the fact that we have our headquarters in Europe is somewhat unique, is somewhat kind of out of the ordinary. But really, we have a lot of members of the team that don't come from Europe. We also have a lot of great partnerships and customers beyond Europe. And really, I think what is maybe like a more kind of fitting focus is sovereignty in general. So I personally, I worry about a future in which Europe's contribution to the world we live in is basically just the cookie banner and regulation and red tape.
Yeah. That's the Silicon Valley joke, right? So let's have a part.
Yeah.
Silicon Valley, let's bring the software. China, let's bring the hardware. And Europe, let's bring the regulations.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But in reality, all these recent developments, people just use whatever is available.
Yeah. I mean, other than maybe our government customers, all the enterprises we're working with, they don't care that our headquarters is in Europe, right? Maybe being in Europe gives us maybe extra credibility for our data protection and security, right? And maybe not so, but I think the strong partnerships we have, like with an HPE, for example, they would work with us just the same if we were an African company.
So you said earlier that you guys solved the hallucination problem. So
Yeah, I said
talk to us about that.
Yeah, I said quotation marks so because it is it's like never anything is 100%. But we published a few weeks ago, we published a paper with one of our academic partners in where we modified the attention mechanism inside the transformer to now be able to trace the flow of factual knowledge from observation to output. And so we can now, for every factual claim that's in the output, we can now highlight where this is coming from in your knowledge base, in your kind of proprietary environment, and not only on the positive side, but also on the negative side. So you can also basically highlight if there's some conflicting knowledge in your database. And that, of course, as I'm sure you can imagine, is for our customers in like the legal domain, in the health domain. Like for those customers, for those users, the question or like how they're using the system is never as easy as they punch in like a question like, when were the Spice Girls founded? And then the model gives you one answer and it's either right or wrong, right? Oftentimes in like legal environments, there's no clear correct one answer. It's always like a strategy, and it's an orchestration of different ideas and facts and strategies. And to make that viable and to give the human the context to do that properly, this is kind of where we're using that. And we have some customers that have already up and running and are using that in production integrations and are super happy with that.
So these systems, so in traditional search, right? It's quite possible that the system will tell you, I don't know. Right. So so these systems, do you think that so you said you annotate, you basically say, okay, so this is my answer and this is how I came up with it. But do you think these systems, people expect them to always have an answer? Is that now the current expectation, you think?
Well, so we have some integrations that are built in a way that they tell you if they don't have any answer on file. So we've got one live integration with the government customer, and they gave us as a requirement, they said, this system should only give you information that is part of this curated knowledge base. Like we all have this all pre-approved. We don't want the system to generate any information, like any factual claim that is beyond what is in our curated knowledge base. And so we're using our technology here to actually like prevent this from happening, where we can pretty easily identify all the information that's been generated that is not based on some evidence inside your knowledge base. And then we can either deactivate that, as we do with this one customer, or we can also basically put like a disclaimer on it and say, oh yeah, this information is not backed by any kind of proof, right? So it may be right, it may be correct world knowledge, but it may also be a hallucination, so tread carefully.
Yeah. So the other interesting new challenge that people, maybe the enterprises haven't gotten up to speed yet, certainly the model providers at least have teams doing this, is alignment, right? So, yeah. I mean, I think most companies, it's fair to say probably, who will adopt this technology quickly will need to get up to speed on some of the best practices around alignment. So, Jonas, so what are the basic things that companies need to know or need to do in advance?
So there's kind of two things that are both called alignment. One is basically that you're now getting no undesired behavior. So that I now basically have a model that does not say offensive things or mean words. And the other thing that's also called alignment is preventing us from being all turned into paper clips. like in an AGI future.
Yeah,
So let's start with the first one on like what is now important for enterprises. And here we have like a somewhat different design philosophy than some other teams in that because we're not addressing consumers, we can have the transparency and the control at our customers' side, right? So we can tell some of the world's best enterprises, like, we've built this model and it's configurable. You can fine tune it. You can actually like configure some things that you don't want, but it's up to you. If like, I don't know, like if Bank of America would want to build a chatbot that was basically a very, very funny, like was kind of making jokes all the time, or ironic or sarcastic, I think that's their responsibility, and they should have technology that would give them all the power they need and all the transparency they need. So I think this is here really where we're not trying to force the model to have a certain behavior. Like, I personally think it's quite annoying that ChatGPT says it's sorry kind of every second sentence, right? It's kind of excusing itself all the time. I don't like that. Maybe some other folks would like that, but this is really where we want to give the control to our customers and to our partners. And then, like, there's an interesting question on like fairness and bias, in that I think we as a society, we have not really figured out what actually we mean when we say we want to avoid bias. Let me give you one example that I have in my slides. If you prompt our model and you're kind of asking who's overrepresented in German prisons, then it'll tell you young men. It's like 99% is men, and most of them are young. I mean, that's clearly observably true. Is this now a sexist bias that we need to remove from the model? So I think in some cases we just don't have the answer yet.
Yeah, and actually there's a recent paper from the folks at AI 21 Labs where they have theoretical proofs that show that basically alignment is very difficult. So any behavior that has a finite probability of being exhibited, they show that there exists a prompt that can trigger that behavior. So basically, that's why you see all these jailbreaks, right? So
yeah,
I think companies just need to be aware that, because obviously these systems you can use these systems in a variety of ways, right? So one, you just expose these models to your data scientists and developers through an API and things like that. And then the extreme would be to have some kind of customer-facing ChatGPT like interface, and that's where some of these issues you need to think through before you go all the way to that direction, right?
Yeah, in a way, but I think also some of that is maybe like a little bit overblown. Because let's say I'll kind of deploy, I don't know, like a chatbot that just picks randomly one of 10 answers, right? And one answer is fuck off, right?
Right.
And that's basically, and that's a chatbot, like picks one of those 10, and whatever you're typing, is that harmful? Is that dangerous? So I think that those are toys. Like we should be aware, and all the users, all the customers and consumers should also be aware that what we have is something that's like an 8-ball. But it does not take responsibility. It does not have its own goals. We cannot rely on its integrity, or it's neither a truth machine nor a deontological authority. So we should kind of take it for what it is. It's useful. And I don't see any uproar if my web search brings up incorrect results. Like sometimes my web search doesn't work well. I got incorrect results. Sometimes it's even like blatantly wrong. I was not looking for that at all. And sometimes I even find things that maybe upset me, right? Because they're on the internet. But nobody is up in arms.
But this goes back to our previous discussion where the expectation and the UX has changed.
Yeah.
Because on a web search, you get a list and you know that it's in the back of your mind, at this point, people are aware of SEO and this kinds of things, right? So, but now we're still in this new interface where people think maybe they don't quite know yet the limitations or things like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we are now so tech savvy that we know how to understand and take web search. But you see this like with the older generation, like with our parents, they still fall for obvious fakes on Facebook. So I think that's kind of where we, as like AI leaders, as entrepreneurs, I think it's our responsibility to not kind of create panic, but tell people that these are tools, they're super useful, but of course they should not be mistaken for what they're clearly not.
By the way, so one topic that I find interesting that maybe is not discussed enough, at least publicly, I'm sure the teams who are involved in these systems discuss it all the time. And this has to do with deployment, right? Because, you have these models which are ginormous. So obviously, every time you interact with ChatGPT, that is expensive. On the other hand, at least some of our listeners are aware that in computer vision, they've had years of, deploying things to sensors or phones and whatever. So they have all these tricks: distillation, quantization, compression. So Jonas, to what extent are we still in the very early days of efficiency in terms of deploying some of these models? Like, are we going to see some of many more efficient tricks for getting a model to do to give enough good response, but maybe not consume all these GPUs?
Yeah, absolutely. We already see some of the models you mentioned earlier, the kind of smaller-ish models. They're actually pretty good. And for like a lot of simpler use cases, they're a perfectly suitable choice. At Europe's, I think like a few months ago, we showed some work with GraphCore where we sparsified a model at like 90%. And so we basically had a like super sparse model. And because on GraphCore, there's like a native sparse matrix multiplication on hardware possible, that worked pretty well. So I think there's a lot of like what we're currently doing. We're brute forcing the scaling of dense transformers, and that's horribly inefficient. It's like in a like if we were for our human brains, if we were like for everything we would learn or for everything we would think, we would activate all the neurons in our head, and that's just super wasteful. Like on training data, on compute. So yeah, I'm expecting. I think everybody or like many people are expecting improvements here. And of course, there's also when you look at like for example the iPhone. I kind of know somewhat because like I kind of used to talk with folks at Apple that kind of built that, but these chips. But these chips that you have on even mobile devices are incredibly capable. They're absolutely amazing, and so I expect that some simpler workloads, like most of the things I'm speaking to Siri about, can reasonably be handled on like on the device level. I'm pretty sure.
And hopefully that still works when you're offline.
Well, that would be like one of the big advantages, right? It would kind of be robust against like offline. It would also be able to understand all the context that you have on your device without uploading that context, right? Yeah, like all your local messages and contacts and images.
Yeah. So, what are 1 to 3 research trends that you think the general public is not aware of, but you're excited about, that might impact some of these systems over the next, say, year or two?
So what I'm currently most excited about is modularization and kind of control flow architectures like smart gating, where we can do things like looping or like there's been this kind of thing like mixture of experts. That's like an established thing. but it was never really especially good because it was still had to be built with the limitations of modern GPUs, in a sense that the kind of quote unquote experts were never really able to be smart about what to learn and how to be used. So I think that's where I'm expecting to see a lot of progress. That's what I'm super excited about. We're also currently looking at quantization, so kind of other ways to be smart about how to use those models. One of the things that we are currently looking at, that we're super excited about, is maybe thinking about the tokenization somewhat differently. I think tokenization is something that is under-researched, maybe because people think it's boring to think about, which I would disagree with.
No, super central if you're using these APIs, because you pay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Speaking of which, Jonas, so in computer vision, I don't think people are aware, but a lot of inferences can actually be done on CPUs.
Yeah.
Right? So do you think this will also eventually happen in these language models?
I don't see that. So there's, when you look at other kind of Cerebras, GraphCore, Samba Nova, they're kind of in between. Like what GraphCore is building is like a mixture of a CPU and a GPU. Like while the CPU is like multiple instruction, single data, and the GPU is like multiple data, single instruction, like the IPU is kind of multiple instruction, multiple data. So I think that I can see that. But for the architectures of transformers that we're using today, those are kind of prohibitively different. Like it wouldn't make much sense to run them on a CPU, because they're like, it's kind of the other way around, right? They're built because they would run well on gaming hardware. That's the kind of hardware lottery argument, right? So we kind of build the systems so that they're super specialized to take advantage of our gaming hardware. So I agree that this is kind of, in a way, an engineering, I don't want to say that a dead end, but a path we took that is unnecessarily wasteful in terms of compute. But it was useful because we had those GPUs laying around anyway.
Yeah. And so unless there's some breakthrough, so surely transformers is not the end of the story, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So in closing, so I'm sure you're hiring, right?
Yes.
So throw off some key elements of your tech stack to kind of entice people. I'm sure PyTorch. What else?
Yeah, so we maybe interesting to know, our whole kind of scaling network and model is owned as all proprietary code base. So we're not just cloning Megatron or DeepSpeed. We basically got our own. We're building some category defining research. Of course, we're using PyTorch, which most people are doing. On our inferencing setup, we're using Rust. So we're like, all of our enterprise stack is in Rust.
I need to get you to talk to the folks behind Ray, the distributed computing framework Ray. So a lot of these foundation model people are starting to use Ray.
Super interesting. For me, that was a learning experience, because I thought, like, my whole life I was always the AI guy. So I used R in the earlier days, and with my last company, I built everything in Django and MySQL. And we mostly hired AI people. So our software engineering was super bad. And so then when we kind of joined in like a bigger context, and the kind of team wanted to send petabytes of data through our monolithic Django stack, everything was on fire. It was horrible. We couldn't scale it. We were sharding like crazy just to get it to run at all. And this is was a learning experience for me to say, software engineering and like proper enterprise grade software is super difficult, but it's also super crucial. So for Aleph Alpha, from the very beginning, I kind of hired for those roles in parallel to the AI people. And I fell in love with Rust during advent of code in, I think it was 2018, when I kind of learned a little bit of Rust and absolutely loved it.
And with that, thank you, Jonas.
Thanks. That was great.